Hi, I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, Consequential Leadership. My name is G. Thomas Zoe. We use this platform to discuss critical kingdom principles that are intended to empower the believer to function with exceptional accomplishment and outstanding achievement in whatever he or she is called to do, whatever your spheres of influence will be. Consequential leadership is totally different from the Greek philosophy of consequentialism, which talks about, the morality of a thing is judged by its outcome. That's not what we're discussing. Consequential leadership just talk about the effect that is produced, or the impact that the believer's life, right, or lack of it causes on his or environment and in the corporate sphere of society. Because everything we do has direct consequences on not just us as individuals and not just our social network, but on corporate society as well. So it is critical for us to realize that our actions, our callings, our goals, our vision, and the way we pursue the cause of God upon our lives have direct consequences, not just on us as individuals, but on our society. And it's based on that, on the variable consequence that this discussion about consequential leadership have been developed. And I hope that this is going to add value to you, even as you spend these brief moments with me. Today, I want to introduce a subject that is tagged, How About Pharaoh? How About Pharaoh may sound unusual for a leadership subject because we have known Pharaoh not necessarily in the records of effective leadership, especially when the story of Pharaoh actually, from a biblical standpoint, is validated by the involvement of Joseph in that mighty kingdom. Albeit, the spotlight today in this discussion is actually to identify the incredible leadership quality that the Pharaoh factor brings into the biblical account of Joseph, this epic Old Testament story that is very familiar, not just to believers, but to non-believers as well. You see, Egypt has its place in history, not least because of, we all know the civilization of the Nile River has its place in Egypt. Egypt is known for a very long tenure of kingdoms and dynasties and pharaohs. We know that the hieroglyphics writing code was also developed in Egypt. We know about the legacy of the great architecture of the pyramids, and all those things, gave Egypt its own place in history, for which in the realm of academia, there is a study called Egyptology, which basically talks about the history of Egypt, its kingdoms, and its impact on the world. But there's also a place for the young man called Joseph, not least because Joseph is a descendant of a covenant family. He comes down from the third generation of the patriarch, and he stands out to be an exceptional person, both in his character, but also his unmatched leadership skill that we see demonstrated in Egypt. So when you bring these two powerful forces, the covenant life, the character, and the exceptional leadership acumen of the young man called Joseph, and the powerful historical legacy of the kingdom of Egypt, you can see these powerful forces, how they bring some lessons to bear on the subject of leadership. And as we discuss it here on the subject of consequential leadership, we are introducing the Pharaoh factor in the powerful legacy of Joseph's story as a way of gleaning the powerful leadership principles that come from Pharaoh, which most of the time are not highlighted at all when we are talking about the success of Joseph. So we might as well just consider this teaching tonight as leadership from a strange place, because Pharaoh is not a person we want to talk about when we are discussing biblical leadership, especially when the story of Joseph comes into the picture. So we might as well just consider this as leadership from a strange place. But be as it may, my interest today is to just help us shift a little bit and see how the principle of leadership, are taught from different angles and from different viewpoints. In this case, we're looking at this unusual character called Pharaoh that we do not necessarily consider most of the time when we are discussing the subject of leadership, especially in the biblical context. But within the framework of the kingdom approach, we see that the story of the Bible is an amalgamation of not just the covenant history, but also hidden factors. And as we see all these hidden non-believers interplaying in the narrative of divine dealing, we cannot help but also see that the story of redemption could not have been completed without these non-biblical factors, or what you call non-covenant factor. And Pharaoh is one of those characters, that we want to consider today, as we discuss the subject of consequential leadership. So I trust that this is going to be a value to you. I want to encourage you, as always, to like the channel and hit the notification button so that anytime a new content is uploaded, you can be notified immediately. And also comment, because I want you to be a part of the discussion as we try to accommodate ideas and build an environment of interactive leadership development that can help to enhance the pursuit of our goals in the ministry and in our professional fields as well. So we are discussing today how about Pharaoh. Historically speaking, when the Joseph factor comes into the equation of the history of Egypt, historians will say that it was during the time of the Middle Kingdom or the second intermediary period. The history of Egypt is divided into segments. So the Joseph story comes into that picture, according to most historians, during the time of the 12th dynasty or the Middle Kingdom period, or what we call the second intermediary period. All of those are part of the historical chronology of Egypt. When Joseph comes into the picture, historians also have, kind of argue back and forth about this period, because the 12th dynasty period is supposed to fall within the time frame of 1991 to 1778 BC. It is in that period, and the historians say that that was the most stable and most prosperous period of the history of Egypt. And during that time, two pharaohs are featured in the historical account. One of those pharaohs is called Sesostris I, right? Another one is also called Senostria III. Difficult names, but we manage them as we go on. These two pharaohs, the historical accounts seem to have their account during the same time. So most historians will agree that these two characters actually are the same, because their involvement with the kingdom of Egypt happens, as far as their study is concerned, during most likely exactly the same time. But there's also another reason for that. The other reason is that it's during this time that the Joseph factor also comes into the equation of the history of Egypt. When Joseph goes into Egypt, he's even giving an Egyptian name that is called Zaphnaam Paneah. Whether that is the right way of pronouncing it or not, but that was Joseph Egyptian. And you remember, if you read the Bible, that comes from Genesis chapter 37 all the way to chapter 50, when Joseph comes out of prison, he meets Pharaoh and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. He gave the strategy to secure the kingdom from the pending drought. Pharaoh makes him the prime minister, and the position, historically speaking, in the Ezra biblical account is called the vizier. The vizier is what you want to call the prime minister in modern parlance. But these are the reasons, amongst other things, that historians of Egyptology will say that these two pharaohs called Senostris I and Senostret III are the same pharaoh. By the way, Pharaoh wasn't a name at all. It was a title for the people who ruled during that period of the history of Egypt. So anytime you hear Pharaoh, it isn't the name of the person, it's actually the title, right, that you may call a president for now, right? So those two names that refer to as Sesostris I and Senostret III are believed to be the same person, because their history account seem to be occurring the same time in the chronology of Egypt. And then the Joseph factor that most historians believe happened during the same time when Egypt became most stable and most prosperous. And this element, this factor, this character, this biblical character of Joseph that is featured in the Ezra biblical account of the history of Egypt happens during this same period. So that is why we are featuring Joseph along or during the period of the 12th dynasty, which is considered the most prosperous and most stable dynasty or most stable period during the time of Egypt. So here we are seeing a powerful historical account of a powerful kingdom called Egypt and a powerful kingdom character, a young man called Joseph, who for reasons we may want to call divine orchestration have come into a merger. And these powerful forces are fused into a dramatic account of leadership expression that, have caught our attention. And we want to see one factor of that leadership expression. Our focus is not on Joseph today. Our focus is on Pharaoh. Why are we focusing on Pharaoh? We are focusing on Pharaoh because Pharaoh is one of the factors in the Joseph account. So we want to see how the Pharaoh factor impacted on Joseph's exceptional leadership as a way of gleaning the lesson that Pharaoh also brings into the discussion of consequential leadership. So I trust that as we continue this discussion, we can see, as strange as it may be for some of us, that we are looking to learn leadership lessons, kingdom leadership lessons, not necessarily from biblical character, but from non-biblical character, and an unbeliever at that. He's called Pharaoh. And that is why we're asking the question when we consider the Joseph account of a great leadership achievement, how about Pharaoh? The significance of the Pharaoh factor in the study of Joseph's leadership prowess is based on the fact that the kingdom of Egypt provided Joseph the platform for him to function in the leadership capacity that he was offered, right? The occasion, right, at the time that presented itself when Pharaoh, the God leader or the court leader of the powerful, the greatest kingdom at the time, didn't have any answer to the issues that were coming, not just on Egypt, but on the rest of the known world. It brought Joseph into the story of Egypt that has its biblical version. So when we see Joseph, we know the story. Joseph come from a complex family. Jacob, from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and then Jacob struggle in the home, Rebekah loving Jacob and Esau favoring and Isaac favoring Esau. The both of them become the two sons become arch rivals. In the process of time, Jacob succeeded in outsmarting his brother, and Esau gets annoyed and is thinking about killing his brother. Rebekah hears that and concocts a plan for Jacob's escape. And Isaac tells Jacob not to marry any of the Canaanite girls, just as he himself didn't marry any Canaanite girl, because his father Abraham had told Eliezer, the servant leader, not to allow his son Isaac to marry any of the Canaanite girls. So the same thing here is following through the line of the patriarch. So Isaac is warning his son Jacob not to take any of the Canaanite women. So as Jacob is fleeing from home, Genesis 28, he eventually enters Syria. He goes to Laban's house. You know the story. He gets married to two girls. The two girls brought in two concubines. So Joseph is having children with two wives and children with two surrogate mothers. Eventually, he returns home, establishes his own family. Joseph becomes the first child of his beloved wife, Rachel. Rachel had died, having her second and last child, Benjamin, as they travel from Syria back to Shechem or to Hebron. So now we see Jacob is having 12 sons, right? And the girl at 13, 12 sons with 4 mothers, 2 official mothers, and 2 surrogate mothers. His beloved wife is already dead. He passed that love of Rachel to Joseph, and that love has invoked some resentment from Joseph's siblings. In the process of time, he finds himself a slave in Egypt. Over time, he had one of his friends whose dream is interpreted, the butler, and the dream of the baker. The baker is killed by Pharaoh, and the butler is restored to his position. About 2 years later, Joseph, the king Pharaoh himself, dreamed a dream that he could not interpret, that eventually brought Joseph into the story. When Joseph stands before Pharaoh, he listens to Pharaoh's dream, and he tells Pharaoh the 2 dreams about the fatted cow and the lean cow and the blossoming corn and the lean corn are the same dream. The reason why God repeated the dream according to Joseph is that the issue, the interpretation of the dream was already an established fact. It was just a matter of time. So what are we going to do? Joseph gave Pharaoh the strategy for preserving the kingdom during the time of drought. In response to that, Pharaoh promotes Joseph to the position of prime minister and tells Joseph that at his word, the kingdom of Egypt will be governed. It is only in the power of the throne that he, Pharaoh, will be higher than Joseph. In other words, Joseph was a monarch over the kingdom of Egypt. And that platform gave Joseph the opportunity, the base, or should I say, gave Joseph the empowerment for the leadership that we know him to have demonstrated in the scripture. And it is based on that we are interested in finding out how the Pharaoh factor contributed to Joseph's leadership success. So now let's face it. Joseph was a slave. Joseph came from a culture that was completely unacceptable to Egyptian culture. The Hebrew culture was a culture that the Egyptians did not appreciate at all. Number two, Joseph was an undocumented immigrant. He was an alien. He was illegal. But worse, he was actually the property of one of Pharaoh's, prominent generals, right? So being a powerful kingdom where the laws came from the word and pleasure of the king, in this case, Pharaoh. And looking at Joseph's vulnerability, the guy came from a place that nobody could identify. Joseph didn't come from a country, he came from a family, right? So you didn't have international laws, you didn't have Geneva Convention, you didn't have Red Cross, you didn't have, International Declaration of, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You didn't have any of those things that would bring the power to be in check when it came to the abuse or the protection of human rights. None of those existed in that ancient time. In other words, Joseph was someone that could be despised. Joseph was someone that could be cut off. Joseph was someone that could even be killed, and nobody would ask the question, right? But be as it may, he had, interpreted the dream of Pharaoh that nobody could interpret, powerful, acceptable. Don't you think that Pharaoh could have just awarded, this unknown young man with maybe some money, or maybe give him freedom from praising, or maybe ask him, where are you coming from? Do you want to go back home? Or one of those things, right? Let's face it. That could just be one of those things that Pharaoh could have done for Joseph. And Joseph would have been most happy, at least to even be free from prison, to give his freedom, or maybe told to go back home, or maybe give him some incentive, here and there. Joseph would have been most happy. That would have been something that any great king, any great monarch, in the category of Pharaoh could have done. After all, Joseph here is just a 30-year-old young man who doesn't have any background in public service, who had never had any leadership position at all, besides his, experience with living with his siblings back home, right? A toxic, domestic environment that Joseph came up from, right? So why would Pharaoh give Joseph such a monumental platform, such a position of tremendous implication? Why would he do that? I mean, I agree, Joseph interpreted a dream, but by interpreting the dream doesn't qualify you to be a political leader, to be an administrative leader. You just interpreted a dream. Why would Pharaoh give this young man that he didn't know from anywhere? He simply came in contact with him because his butler told him that when I was in prison, I had a dream, and this young man interpreted a dream, and it came to pass just as he said it. Most likely, he would be able to interpret your dream. That's how Joseph came into contact with Pharaoh. So what was it so much that Pharaoh would entrust this young man in such a vulnerable way? Joseph was not tested. Joseph had no background in public service. Joseph wasn't a politician at all. Joseph was, the 11th of 12 children. A 30-year-old man. We're talking about the most powerful kingdom during that day. And here's where the story of Pharaoh comes into the Joseph leadership opportunity. And that's what I'm asking, how about Pharaoh? For Pharaoh to have entrusted Joseph with such powerful powerful responsibility and gave Joseph such leverage in the powerful kingdom of Egypt meant a number of things in Pharaoh's own leadership credential. Number one, that Pharaoh was a very secure leader. That is a very important key for us to understand. What does it mean to be a secure leader? To be a secure leader is one who is not threatened by the success of other leaders, especially one, that he himself has given opportunity to. Oh, how that is so critical in the 21st century, that we need people who are so secure that the success of other people doesn't threaten them, that the success of people that they might have even groomed doesn't threaten them. That is what it means to be secure. You are so secure in your opportunity. You are so secure in your calling. You are so secure in what you are called to do that you even want other people to succeed. Not only that you want them to succeed, but you are ready to give them an incentive to succeed, even if they became more popular than you. That is what Pharaoh is demonstrating here. The character of a secure leader. Number two, why would Pharaoh entrust Joseph with such powerful responsibility? Because Pharaoh was vision driven. What was the vision of Pharaoh? To secure his kingdom, to ensure that the drought, the famine, the economic collapse that would have followed immediately after the economic boom of 7 years would not bring his kingdom down. The survival of the kingdom of Egypt, and by extension, the survival of the new world, then was more important to Pharaoh's own popularity, to Pharaoh's own position, to Pharaoh's own claims. That is what it means to be vision driven. When the fulfillment of the vision becomes more important than anything else, when you are willing to succumb your own popularity, your own prestige, your own platform, your own, wealth to the vision, then you are a vision-driven leader. And Pharaoh demonstrated that by entrusting Joseph, this unknown young man, with that powerful position to such extent that everything that went on in Egypt was based on Joseph's instruction. Number three, how about Pharaoh? Pharaoh has to be featured in Joseph's success leadership story because Pharaoh did not usurp Joseph's leadership. So not only was Pharaoh secure, that means Pharaoh wasn't threatened by Joseph's success or popularity. Neither was it that Pharaoh was only vision driven, but Pharaoh did not usurp Joseph's authority. He didn't usurp Joseph's leadership. He didn't come and wonder, now, you're becoming to be too popular. People are knowing you. People are obeying you. Make sure that you don't do this. Let me try to find myself in the picture because I don't want to be forgotten. None of that mattered to Pharaoh. And that is what makes Pharaoh one of the success stories of leadership, especially when we are discussing kingdom leadership. Pharaoh did not usurp Joseph's authority. And number five, Pharaoh was supportive of Joseph's leadership. And that is why Joseph became the success we know him to be. Joseph wasn't just successful because he was anointed, because he was a covenant child, because God has set him up to be such success, all of which are true. But had Pharaoh not given Joseph that platform, it's unlikely Joseph would have ever been able to have such global impact that has outlasted his time and continue to be a subject of study in the realms of leadership even to the 21st century. When we see Joseph successful, we must never forget that without the Pharaoh factor, Joseph might not have been that successful. It was Pharaoh who gave Joseph that platform, an unbeliever at that. An unbeliever, a person you may want to consider someone who will have been very, very protective, right? Who will have monopolized everything. But this unbeliever never did that. How the legacy of Pharaoh, this particular Pharaoh, how the leadership credentials of this Pharaoh are so needful in the kingdom today. How do we need to learn from Pharaoh, who demonstrated security in his leadership, who was vision driven, who did not usurp Joseph's authority, who was not afraid to be vulnerable at all, and who was very supportive of this young man. Today, when we study Joseph, this powerful success story, long before we had anyone called Moses, long before we had any prophet called Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel, long before we had the story of the great promised land possession, long before we had all the prophecies of the Old Testament, of the Old Testament prophets, there was this young man, 30-year-old, who emerges out of the worst of life's adversity, who was given such a powerful platform by a leader, unbeliever at that, because he was very secure, he was vision driven, he was not afraid to be vulnerable, He did not usurp Joseph's authority. He was supportive of him. These 5 leadership characters of Pharaoh are the reason behind Joseph's success story, for which we are asking this question today. How about Pharaoh? God bless you until I see you again.